hello. Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
Good.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Small Talk. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And before we begin, I'm Silvia Karman Cubiñá. I'm the Executive Director of the BAS. And before we begin Small Talk, I would like to thank Art Bridges for their amazing support of this series. And I would like to introduce Mark Handforth. So Small Talk is a series that we have at the BAS, and we talk to artists from all around the world who are part of our collection or part of our exhibition program. And the fun thing is that we've gone all around the world, and now via all around the world, we're in Miami with Mark. So Mark, welcome. Hi.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be here, very virtually, but not that far away.
Not that far away, actually almost down the street.
Yeah, right around the corner. I know.
Exactly. So amazing to talk to you. And, there are two big subjects because we've gotten all of these questions. And the big subjects are Miami and your work and the pandemic. So
Right.
Let's start talking about Miami before we go into all the amazing things that you've done and all the amazing places you've shown. Let's begin at home.
Okay.
And even chronologically. So it's really amazing that despite the fact that you've shown at the Hammer Museum and Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, Bard, wow, there's such a long list of places everywhere in the world. Your first show was here in Miami at MoCA in 1996, was it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, we've been here, Dara Friedman, my wife. So Dara and I we came in at the end of 92. We came straight out of art school. We were at art school in London, and you probably know Dara's work, but Dara's a filmmaker, obviously, and so Dara really wanted to just come to Miami and make a film. We were living in London. We had no money, and it was cold and gray, and we just got on a plane and came to Miami. It seemed like that, there was just, why not, just try it out. And when we got here, it was just completely something else, something completely different. And I think in a way, that massive difference between everything I'd known and everything I was seeing was really, really kind of inspirational, really kind of fired me up. And then on the other side of it, in the early 90s, when we came to Miami, you could, we lived on Miami Beach. We lived on the beach for like $300 a month. I mean, you could live here at that time really inexpensively. This was kind of just as the hotels were getting restored, but it was still really cheap. You could be an artist in Miami and exist. You couldn't really do that anywhere else. So it was kind of like, it gave us the opportunity to kind of actually, not have to get a job, basically.
Did I think I visited you in your apartment. Did you live at the Helen Mar?
Yeah, we lived at the Helen Mar. Yeah, that was later on. Yeah, I love that building. That was like the
greatest
place.
So I visited you there the first time I think I visited you here in Miami.
Yeah, that was a great place. I mean, I loved it there.
Beautiful.
We lived all over the beach. We lived down on Pennsylvania. The first place was on like 15th and Euclid. It was great. It was like perfect place to be. It was, and also the thing about the beach, I think, which was really different. When you came from London, which is this very specific kind of architecture, Miami Beach, these kind of apartments, these cheap apartments, they were cheap then anyway, were these sort of minimal white spaces because they had this sort of slightly kind of, it's deco, but it's deco with a little touch of Bauhaus. So in a way, as spaces to work, they were kind of great. You were constantly within a really kind of, a little bit of a white cube, and that doesn't really exist in other places like that. I mean, I found that kind of great as well.
That's amazing. So, I have a lot of questions, and instead of maybe saving them for the end, because we're on topic here, I'll just sprinkle them throughout, and that way we can just follow the conversation. And there are a lot of questions about Miami. I have Trudy Sejas asking why you chose Miami as your home.
Why we chose? Well, that's a good. So we chose it. So Dara chose it initially because she wanted to film here, and it was kind of perfect for film. It was this. Had incredible light, it had extraordinary kind of environments, had crazy people. When we first came here, you'd walk down Washington Avenue was wild. I mean, still wild sometimes at like 2 or 3 in the morning, but in the, in the early 90s, it was really wild. And that was kind of a really exciting kind of environment to be in. And then it was this, this business of kind of having space to work. For me, partly to have space to work. You know, we worked in, we were able to get kind of studio space. People would just let us work in these trashed out buildings, which was great. And then I suppose for me, what's really important, I suppose, is this kind of relationship, which is, I suppose, relates to the piece that's about this relationship to light, to artificial light, and to crazy sunlight. You know, which is, you know, I came from kind of a gray place, if you like, from England. When you arrive in Florida, it's crazy light, like that. It's so bright. You know, people probably know this experience when you fly in and you step out of the airport and it just like hits you. How, well, the humidity hits you, but also the light, the intensity of the light. And then because it was Miami Beach, it was South Beach, there was this crazy kind of day for night existence. So all of this neon, all of this colored light, trashy flashing signs. I mean, it was fantastic. So that relationship with light, I think, is really kind of key actually to the work that I make. I think that kind of that movement between the natural and the artificial is kind of at the core, I think, of what I make. And that's got a lot to do with Miami and with Miami Beach, to be honest.
Well, you just answered Salvador Chavona's question about the landscape in Miami and the light and what you get for your work. And, you know, now that you're talking about sort of a natural light and artificial light, your work, let's tie you back into your work at the Bass, Untitled Silver Branch of 2016. And there are lights and lampposts everywhere in your work. How did that begin and how did that happen?
It's actually kind of to do with this, and it's a little bit like what I was saying about this business of when when I first arrived in Miami, and the, you know, it's when you come from somewhere else, Miami's it's very flat, and B, you've got this enormous expanse of sky. And one thing that really struck me right from the get-go was that when you look up at the sky, especially when you're kind of driving along the freeway or even just walking, you see these crazy Cobra head lampposts, which you don't really see in other places so much. And you really see them in Miami. They're floating up there, high up, and they almost seem like almost like a cosmic apparition. You know, they're really floating in the sky. And I kind of love that sense of them as being these almost like living things that were kind of existing up there. I think with Silver Branch, you've also got this quality that branches have, where branches seem to float in the sky too. I mean, I kind of love this sense of things that extend into the space above us. And I suppose that's kind of the way that branches have you know, they exist in that sense too. And I think in this piece, the two kind of really meet each other. And you have these two objects that find themselves floating, albeit from a kind of clunky wire, which is also something I quite like too, where you've got this, you know, magical sense of floating, and at the same time something very simple that's holding them then. And I think that's that same duality, you know, that the idea that light is both beautiful and sublime, but man-made light is kind of clunky too, but that doesn't reduce its magic. And I think this piece is all about those bits of magic and bits of clunky, you know, like the branch is this beautiful branch which is cast from a quince tree. It was cast in Germany at this foundry. It was what we call a burnout cast, where they took the entire branch and coated it in a ceramic plaster mix and literally burned all the wood out and then poured bronze in, which is why it's such an intricate casting. And yet at the same time, it's this very kind of, you know, industrial material, aluminum, which is not what's normally used for art casting. It kind of refers back to kind of industry. And I kind of like that sense of the piece, that it jumps between these two places, between the beautiful organic and the man-made and the industrial. And it kind of hits those two poles at the same time. Yeah, this is a photo so it was made originally for a show I did in Genoa in Italy. I mean, Genoa is like a fantastic, crazy, wild medieval port city in Italy. It's like a 14th century Miami. I mean, it's just a great city. And I did a show at Villa Croce in this beautiful old villa kind of sits right on the ocean there. And because the villa was basically a set of these grand rooms, but also the villa had a wonderful, slightly dilapidated quality sometimes too. And it had these beautiful vaulted ceilings with chandelier hooks. I made a set of pieces that were all kind of hanging from the chandelier hooks. And so this is how Silver Branch was made. It was made to hang where a chandelier would normally hang. So it's kind of like that. It refers, I suppose, a little bit to the idea of a chandelier or something, though it's kind of nothing like that at the same time. it's this sort of presence in the space, yeah, it kind of
the constant natural and artificial that I think is so present in your work. But there are also a lot of other found objects. Marjorie Gordon's asking about the found objects and the influence in your work. I feel like I need to bring up these people who are asking questions because it feels like a party today. A lot of people we know, our friends are tuning in. So it's really amazing that they're kind of here with us, socializing as we cannot.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I think found objects are, sculpture is objects. Sculpture, the reason you make sculpture is because you are kind of in love with the world. You're in love with the physical world that you live in. And there are different ways of reflecting that world. And if you're not going to paint it and you're not going to film it, you just take it. And I suppose the reason I liked sculpture was that it just took it. And I figured if I was going to make things, I could also just take things and work with them or remake them or reference them or make them part of a kind of a larger collage. But I love this idea that whatever I came upon was mine to work with, if you like. And it seemed like the best way to engage with the world was to take a little bit of the world with me, which is kind of what I think I do with these trash cans and these hydrants and Vespas and things like that, cars. I mean, I've always worked with these things that I find, yeah, like this is the car in Rome, which is in a church in Rome in St. Andrea di Scafis, and it's the car's jacked up with candles. Yeah, these candle pieces, Vespas I found on the street of Rome, and I just cover them with candle. People just put candles on and they grow and grow and grow. It's time-based work.
Isn't that Vespa at the Rebel collection right now?
Yeah. That one's at the Rebel collection. The one lying down on the ground. Yeah. It's part of that collection.
And I think that the spiky fluorescent tubes, which you work with so much, is I think in the design district.
There's different ones. Yeah. I mean, there's pieces. Yeah. Craig has a wonderful piece in the design district. That's a big neon piece. I mean, there's also a piece at Pam that's a big rising sun that's in red that people might have seen. That's installed. Looks kind of like you'll see sometimes. I mean, they're quite hard to install. This piece is in France at the Consortium, the lamppost, which was made for the Public Art Fund originally. But yeah, I mean, I pull things. If I see something, I'll take it and I'll work with it. And I think that's, if you like, that's the beauty and the poetry of sculpture. I think this is the ability, the freedom to do that, the freedom to kind of take things for what they are.
So let's talk about the fluorescent tubes.
Yeah.
They're this material that is recurring and always in your work.
So the fluorescent tubes are, I mean, they're interesting because on the one hand, they have a strong art historical reference, if you like, certainly in terms of modernism. On the other hand, they're this very, very kind of cheap but extraordinary mechanism for drawing, essentially. I wanted to make drawings. The first piece I made actually with the neons, with the fluorescents, was for a show I did in France, and I didn't really have any money. There was a budget to fly me out to make a sculpture, and instead I said, well, let's use that travel budget. I'm going to fax you a drawing, and I'm going to ask you to make it in fluorescent tubes, because you can buy fluorescent tubes anywhere in the world. They're like a universal, and I like that quality to them, that they were just this completely universal. The thing itself is almost not a thing. It's just a line of light. And I kind of love that idea that there was something I could work with that was so generic in the sense that none of that really mattered. And yet at the same time, it does completely matter, which is, I think, the funny thing about the fluorescents, is that we can say that they're generic and you can get them on the shelves at Home Depot. And yet when we see them, they're beautiful and magical and exceptional. And I think that's kind of that's the thing I liked about them. That's kind of why I've continued to work with them. But they're drawings.
Speaking of fluorescent tubes, do you remember how we met and where we met and what we were supposed to do that we ended up not doing, but then you did it here?
Yeah, and funnily enough, it's interesting you should mention. So this is the electric tree. We first met over the idea to try to make the electric tree in Puerto Rico. It was kind of this. There was this plan. We were going to go find this amazing tree, which we did find an amazing tree in the old city right in front of the castle, and yeah, it never quite happened, but it was always this thing that I wanted to do. And then it happened in Miami in Griffin Park, with the show at MoCA. And funnily enough, I was there today because it's just been restored, and we've just finished. The Knight Foundation very generously paid for a full restoration. They gave MoCA won a grant. China really pushed for that, which was great, and Kevin really pushed for it. So that people have worked on this really hard, and the piece has been completely restored. And I saw it today lit up again for the first time in a couple of years, which is great. So that's Griffin Park in North Miami. It's going to be up, which is great for kind of the new year. It's a great kind of celebratory thing. But that's
really wonderful. I think you had just gotten back from India.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you came up with the idea. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so basically, I was in India. Dara and I were curated into a show in India, in Delhi, with Peter Nagy at Nature Mort. And Peter called and said, this is sort of in the 90s, and Peter said, don't make anything in India, ship whatever your work it is. So we completely ignored him and didn't ship anything, and just went to India for 3 months to try to make something. And Dara brought all his camera equipment, and I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Of course, you get there and you're overwhelmed. You've got no idea. And I came across this situation where was in Mysore. We decided to live in Mysore for a while, for a month or more. People were preparing for a wedding. A wedding's a really big deal. You have to invite a lot of people. Space, it was hard to find a space to do that. So this family had basically found an enormous banyan tree. They were going to wrap the outside of it in canvas to make an enclosed kind of architecture. And before doing that, they'd strung all these fluorescents up inside it to light the inside of what would be, quote unquote, the building. But before they put the canvas on the outside, these lights were on the tree. It was magical. So I asked if I could photograph it. They were fine with that. And I showed that in the show in Delhi as a kind of big light box, this photograph of this tree with all these lines of lights on the branches. It was kind of this magical thing. And of course, everyone's like, "Where's that from? Is that from America? Or is that?" I was like, "No, it's from it's from Mysore. It's totally Indian." But I kind of love that idea of the way that people relate to nature, the way that they exist with nature. That kind of coexistence is really beautiful in that piece. And I think that tree, it creates this the banyan itself, particularly the one in Griffin Park, makes this pool of shade during the day, which is why people go there and they use it. And then at night, it creates this pool of light by making this piece. It makes that area kind of a social space that exists throughout the night too. So you kind of have this duality going on where you're almost mirroring what's happening with the sun and the shade by day. I love it as a piece. I mean, I love it as a piece also because I think a lot of people don't even know it's an artwork, which is kind of, I think you've really got somewhere where people don't even know whether what you've made is an artwork. And yet they somehow are able to partake of it and have to have it be part of their lives. I mean, I think that's, I make a lot of public art. I kind of love public art. I know a lot of people, it's a tricky area, but what's interesting to me is this idea of the way that you engage with all sorts of people, maybe without them even realizing it. And I like that sort of conversation, and I like the challenge of being able to maybe pull that off, which is not, sometimes it happens to work really, really well with a tree. So I'm very happy about that.
It does work really well with a tree. And I think, yes, it doesn't look like a work of art, but it is a work of art. And the beauty of that, as you were saying now, is that it performs the best qualities of a great work of art, because it makes you sit there and experience it and take it in and all those really great things. So, I ask everyone that I interview for this small talk series, because it's the only thing we talk about now, and why not? But for an artist, it's particularly interesting. So what have you been doing work-wise and hobby-wise? Like, any funny hobbies, anything new that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been, I have to say, it's kind of weird being an artist in a pandemic, because, basically as an artist, what you do is you go in your studio and you get kind of crazy doing things. That's kind of what you do anyway. So the pandemic, to some extent, has kind of it's exacerbated that sense of being alone in the studio, which is kind of like, in some ways, that's actually a very kind of creative process. It's a little weird because you don't do anything social at all, but that kind of, that business of really, really kind of engaging with your work, I think is exacerbated, I suppose, in the pandemic. That becomes like something that we kind of really do. I mean, I've been working on, I just actually did a massive commission that's about to be installed in Doha in Qatar. So it's an enormous sculpture, 20 feet tall, absolutely kind of giant, that we shipped out on a ship. And I was working on that really through most of the pandemic, which was kind of great. I was working on it both here at the studio and also with the metal fabricator, and who are actually not far from you in Coral Gables, so I work with all the time. So that was kind of a huge project. And I also did another commission in Miami, which is actually at Ransom Everglades at the school, which is this kind of beautiful piece with a bell that got made, which is you should go and see if you can get in there, which is really great, called the Ringing Rock. So those were kind of like really kind of involved commissions, which I kind of, you know, really enjoyed doing. And then this work on the tree has been kind of great as well. I mean, otherwise, you know, Dara and I go to the, it's funny, like you're trying to think of these things that you can do. I love to go to the beach at the end of the day, I suppose. And that's actually something, you know, when Dara and I first lived here, we lived on Miami Beach, we'd go to the beach every single day, at the end of the day, every day. That was the rhythm. And also in the early days, I mean, I was working a lot with really horrible, with fiberglass, really nasty materials. And I felt like my skin was so polluted. And so at the end of every day when I left the studio, I would always just go and jump in the ocean. And then I felt like cleaner or something. And then we sit on the beach and drink, and, you know, it's kind of a great thing. So we've sort of been doing that again. It's actually was a real gift in a way to not be, you know, it's not really be able to go out. So we're like, well, then we'll go to the beach, and we'll sit on the beach and we'll watch the sunset and we'll have a drink, and we'll, you know, it's actually, it's really great to be able to do that again. We've been doing that a lot, actually. That's kind of, that was, and then reading the New Yorker, like, you know, all the time, you know, just too much reading, you know.
Yeah, you know, I think that a lot of people like to talk about the institutions and government and everything. We've become much more local right now. And yes, we have. However, I think people have also become much more local, meaning in their home, in their neighborhood, with their own people. We have more time now, which is quite wonderful. And there are some blessings and
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah.
Just seeing what you didn't see maybe a few months ago.
Yeah, and I think remembering what it is that's kind of amazing about, I mean, what I did also, it was interesting at first when the pandemic happened, I also would start to go, and I still do that, I go on these really long walks, which I really like. So I will just, I mean, I live in the Grove, right? So then I'll just head off, you know, under the, you know, on the underline, I head off downtown, and I'll just walk through downtown, and I'll walk north, and, you know, I'll spend a day walking, which is kind of what I love to do anyway. And it's what I used to do, I suppose, when I was much younger and when I was first here. And it's, you know, and I take photographs and I see things and I pick things up and I bring them home. And, you know, I think that having the time to do that again has been really good. I've really, really enjoyed that. So that's kind of been a big thing for me, I think, doing that. Which is, again, it's like something I used to do all the time. And now I'm doing it again. You know, that's kind of it's like back to where I was in a way, back to the future or something.
Absolutely. So what, you have some permanent work of you've mentioned a few here in Miami, public permanent work. You've mentioned Ransom Everglades now.
Yep.
And then the one in Doha. What other works of yours are permanent?
Oh, well, there's pieces, I mean, there's a massive piece in Paris. It's like 70-foot tall piece called Twisted Lamppost Star at Porte de Bagnolet, which is one of the gates to the city of Paris, which was a commission I did, about 4 years ago for the mayor of Paris, which is kind of fantastic, which is this crazy piece that's, it's an enormous stadium lamppost that's folded into a massive star that has these kind of cobra head lamps, rather like your piece, you know, that light that whole, and it's at one of these kind of crazy gates of the city of Paris. So you have, you know, 5 roads and a tram line and a subway line all coming in together. So it's like one of these kind of crazy intersections. So yeah, if you're going to Paris and you're going from the airport, you're going to see that piece, which is kind of great. There's permanent pieces in Dallas at the Dallas Museum of Art. There's a kind of very famous star there, the red star called Texas Tom, which is at the Rachofsky House in Dallas. And then there's another piece at the Dallas Museum of Art. There's pieces, yeah, I mean, there's pieces kind of all over. There's pieces in Zurich. There's pieces, I'm trying to think where you would, pieces in Chicago. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of probably, there's actually a piece of a recent one that went up last year in San Francisco, but no one's, I mean, if people are flying, I mean, I'm flying so much now, but then the new San Francisco International Airport installed a really massive, great hanging piece, this huge hanging red star, kind of folded beams and lights that's hanging in the new Harvey Milk Terminal, which is the new terminal that they built. So that's yeah, you couldn't miss it if you went there. But that was a kind of a big project that I did last year. That's permanent that you would see.
So So it's really, really hard to do enormous public sculpture, really hard. So
Yeah.
going back to the first time you tried one and now, what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Oh, I mean, well, it's interesting. So the first one I did was really that piece Lamppost for the Public Art Fund, which was done, curated by Tom Eccles, and it was made for Central Park, for that kind of amazing corner of Central Park where there's the big gold statue of General Grant and there's the Plaza Hotel. That corner, it's a really amazing corner on Fifth Avenue. So, you know, Tom asked me to make this piece for that corner of the park, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just crumple up this lamppost and put it there. You know, it just seemed like a good, you know, I was like, yeah, that'll be great. You know, and I think I didn't really think too much about like what it would mean and how people would deal with it. You know, I was just thinking of it as a good work. And you know, and then some people were like, well, what's going to happen when people skateboard on it, and what's going to happen when people jump on it? And I mean, it was fine. You know, I was like, it's going to be fine. Yeah, they did end up skateboarding up and down it, and they ended up riding on it. And I was like, it's going to be okay. You know, I don't really mind if that happens as long as they're kind of engaging with it. So in a way that was, yeah, I was really kind of loose and unthinking. I mean, in a practical sense, I just like made it. I wasn't thinking too far ahead. Now it's a little bit different because you know, the bigger the pieces get, the more permanent they get, then you have all this engineering and all this, you know, you have to meet all these kind of requirements, and it has to be safe, and it has to be this, and it has to be that. It has to, you know, like the one in San Francisco has to be earthquake proof, and all of that kind of adds complexity, which is tricky. So what you find doing is then kind of like trying very much to sort of allow that stuff to happen, but not let it kind of have anything to do with the work, I suppose is what I'm saying. And you get very good at that. And you get very good at kind of figuring out, well, how do we make sure that everyone's happy, but that the work is still a really good work, and the work is still alive, and it doesn't get, because I think a lot of public work gets killed by all that stuff. So, you know, you're in this kind of battle for like the soul of your piece. But it's doable. You can do it. You just have to, you need a good structural engineer who's willing to work with you. And you know, normally, you know, structural engineers, they'll be like, oh, why don't you just stick a massive beam here? You know, and you're like, well, no, it doesn't really quite do it, you know. So you're like, you know, you must try a little bit harder with me, you know. And so then you can normally work something and get to somewhere really good in the end. If someone,
and how much of that process? What is that, Mark?
I mean, you need a really good curator on these projects. That's also the trick with a good public work, is that the involvement of a curator is really important, because what curators do is they're really good at translating what the artist needs to the kind of bureaucrats and the people, you know, and actually putting their foot down and saying, no, we've got to, like, you know, we need to do this. So that relationship is really important, I think. I actually think that's really key to good public work.
That's very interesting. I had never heard that before at all, but I suppose so, because I think that it's almost like the elements, the weather, the engineers, and whoever is paying for it probably conspire to make your work probably not as good as you thought.
Yeah.
Because it would be more practical.
Probably. Yeah, but also you're probably coming with a crazy, like look at Ugo's piece that you have. You know, you know, when you go to a city and you say, I want to stand like, you know, 5 massive boulders on top of each, you know, the city's probably like, what? You know, you need someone who's able to explain to them why this is a good idea, even though it sounds crazy, and why it's actually going to be great. And I think that that's actually what's interesting with public art. I mean, whether it's like, you know, the tree with the light, you know, these are crazy ideas. You know, you're basically having someone who's saying, actually, this is good. This is going to be good. Trust us, you know. And the curator basically is the person that says, I mean, the artist always says it's going to be great, trust me, but no one believes the artist. You know, the curator is the person saying, trust me, you know, this is going to be good. Let him do what he wants to do, and it'll be good in the end.
Well, you know, I hadn't planned this to be a conversation about public art, but I find it so interesting. And I agree, there's a curator who's working with the artist, especially as well, to cite the work.
Yeah.
Like where it is such a huge part of the success of a work, like at the entrance to a city, or, you know, in the corner of a park, as opposed to the middle of the park, and many other conversations that take place. I have a very interesting question. Tom Healy asks, how different are your ideas about art making when you first began than now? And I think this conversation probably is kind of that, but more broadly speaking about your entire practice.
I think what's interesting is that when you begin, you don't really have, you're kind of inventing you're creating your own language, I suppose. Everything's new, and everything you pick up is different, and everything you do is different. And I think inevitably, as the longer you work, you start speaking in a language that you've created. And I mean, and that's good and bad. I mean, I think what's good about it is that you can kind of finesse that language, and there's a lot to explore within that. What's bad about it is that you could get kind of comfortable in that. And so I think that there's an inherent tension there where you're also trying to kind of, you're on the one hand, you kind of know what you're doing. And on the other hand, you've also got to kind of make yourself not know what you're doing, so that you're willing to do things that are different, and that you're pushing yourself, and that you're willing to make mistakes and screw up and all of that. And I think that's, part of the energy, I think, of being a really young artist, which is fantastic. It doesn't really matter if you screw up. No one really cares. I mean, it's like, it's great when you begin. No one's looking at what you do, and no one cares anyway, which is a great way to be. And I remember, doing the first show I did in New York, I had no idea. We did this show. I put this, I did a show with Dara. Dara showed films. I made this massive satellite dish. I don't know. And then suddenly it was like, you're like, oh my God, everyone's looking at it. And it's like, there's reviews and things like that. It hadn't even occurred to me that, and suddenly you're like, oh, people do look, or they care, and then that's a bit spooky, that's a different thing. But hopefully, yeah, it's interesting. I think that there is a, it's a good process, because I think this business of having a language that's your own is really important. I mean, I think that, and you kind of, I mean, that's true. I mean, with Tom, you see that in literature, you see it in film. I mean, I think you see it in all of the arts. You see it in dance. You see this kind of development of something, and that's kind of really beautiful. But I imagine for everyone, and I imagine this is true of the other arts too, is that you have to kind of also keep needling yourself a little bit to make sure you're not getting complacent or too comfortable, which is, good sometimes. So,
speaking of being uncomfortable, I have a question, but not too uncomfortable. What is your idea, your crazy project that is unrealized that you would like to do and you still haven't done?
Oh, yeah. There's a piece that I want to make. Actually, this is kind of a good story. This is a piece that I want to make that is this, it's called Star Hill. It's an enormous, I work with stars a lot, obviously. So it's a, if you like, a half star, a three-dimensional star that pitches up as a massive hill, basically. But when I say a hill, I mean, a good 50 feet tall and probably 200 feet wide, 200 feet across. And it would be banked with grass, almost like at the side of the highway where you have the embankments that come up. And so what you would have is this kind of crazy structure that's almost like a kind of natural phenomenon that people would then kind of sit on and go up to the top of. It would be kind of this crazy monument, and you wouldn't necessarily initially know quite what it was. It would kind of reveal itself gradually. I had wanted to do this when I did this big project on Governor's Island, and I was supposed to propose pieces, and I know that they said, they said the budget was limited, and then the president of the Trust for Governor's Island, all these people in the city of New York came to this meeting we had at the gallery in New York, and I built this enormous model of this hill. The model I made, I wanted to impress them, so the model I made was sort of 10 feet across of this massive, great star hill. And we bought all of the fake grass we could find in New York City, and we bought tons of these little tiny figures and glued them all over, and there were like nudists and all kinds of people on this hill, and animals, everything, it was like this crazy sort of diorama. And then the people walked in and they just said, "Are you out of your mind?" And that was it. They were like, "This is just completely impossible and unrealistic." I was like, okay. So that was, but I still feel like I can do it somehow, even though it isn't.
I'd love to see a picture of it.
Yeah, I can send you. I mean, I don't have it. I can send you a picture. I'll send you a picture of it.
I would love to see a picture of the crazy maquette as well.
Yeah, the maquette's fantastic. I mean, it was, and there was so much fake dust that we were like coughing and choking. It was just, it was crazy. It was just, it's a good piece. One day, if you want to do it, Silvia, you can.
One day. Well, we have Miami Mountain is itself a mountain. We just have to find a hill.
Yeah. No, there you go. That's right. You just need a lot of dirt.
But I think that those crazy ideas and those crazy projects have to happen like forever in your career and my career and everybody's career. I think this notion of being uncomfortable is really wonderful.
Yeah.
And, and it happens less and less as you progress in your career, because I remember waking up at 3 a.m. like almost every week when I started at the museum, and even before that, because everything was new and everything was a risk, and I was probably unqualified to do half of it. And when it happens today, it's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
It's really amazing when that sort of feeling really uncomfortable and slightly underqualified to do whatever it is you're doing, like 5 boulders and, in a park or whatever it is. It's amazing. When was the last time you felt like that?
Oh, I mean, it's funny it's funny when you mentioned that. When I did the piece I did in San Francisco in the airport, I had to go and do this presentation in San Francisco to the city of San Francisco and the county. And I was in Germany at the time. So I flew over from Germany, flew to San Francisco, and I brought this model with me of the sculpture, which is big. The sculpture itself is like 18 feet tall, but it's hanging. So I brought the model I'd already made. And then I got to I was in this hotel room. I had a day before the presentation. I was like, I should just make a model of the airport to scale and put the model in the model, so like, that's a great idea because I've got nothing to do. So then I went out to a hardware store and an art store. I bought all this stuff and I made this enormous model of a section of the airport in my hotel room. And then I realized, like, so how the hell am I going to get it out? First of all, like, how do I even get it out? And then when I got it out, so then I called a bellhop and he came and we brought it down on a trolley. And then when I got outside, I was like, I couldn't get it in a cab or anything. There's no way to there was nothing to move it in. So then I was like, okay, I'm just going to take the trolley from the hotel and I'm going to wheel this thing across San Francisco to the city building. It took me like an hour wheeling this massive model of the airport. And, and it was great. It worked out really well. So, that was,
you got it there.
Yeah, I got it there and I got the thing. So that,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So before people start getting hungry, any question? Actually, I'm going to ask you a few questions from this group. Marianne Lamanaka, who's asking thoughts, Mark, your thoughts on dismantling the museum as we know it today.
Wow, that's a heavy question. I mean,
it's heavy.
It's a heavy question. I mean, what I would say is that there's, I mean, if we're talking about different things. We're talking about the museum in terms of, what the museum represents, what its history is, what it kind of means as a kind of, if you like, hierarchical institution. I can totally understand the notion of dismantling the museum in the sense that there's a logic to that. On the other hand, I think the museum is also this place that kind of presents new ideas, and so that I don't know that if we're talking about dismantling it, I don't know that should be the end game. But I think if we're talking about dismantling the kind of hierarchies and investigating the history of what museums are and what they represent, yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the other hand, also, I'd say one of the reasons I do public work is because I just love having stuff out within the community, within the environment. And to some extent, that is, I think what I would say is not so much dismantle the museum, but let's extend it out and let's make it a different thing. And let's change the tone of what it is. And instead of the museum being the kind of the hierarchical validator of culture, let's make the museum part of a broad conversation that happens all over the community and more open. And I think that's something to kind of to reach for. But yeah, I mean, that's a what do you think, Silvia? That's an interesting question for you.
Sure. Dismantle it, I lose my job. No, I think we wrestle with that every single day on how it is that we can dismantle and how do you really dismantle it? I mean, someone has to, open the door, raise money, make it function. So I think the dismantling is less in, who works there and how we work, but how the programming. I think it's the programming that I think we have to dismantle almost like on a daily basis and question, like, why are we doing this? Oh, because we do it every season. Well, do people even like this anymore? So right. This constant questioning of, are we doing our job?
Yeah.
I think you start there. And I think working with artists at museums, working with artists as a partner in creating new work is a really amazing way to dismantle the programming or boring programming.
Right.
Because what you're doing then is the museums are partnering with the artists, and the artists are having a heavier say. When you go to artists and say, what kind of project can we help you realize? And where is this project? Is it online? Is it massive and on a hill? Or maybe it's inside. It could be inside. But I think that conversation with the artist keeps things fresh.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's reminding me of. There's a great Chris Burden piece that was made in the '70s, I think, called "Exposing the Foundations of the Museum," where he basically, I think it was in I'm trying to remember which museum. It's in California, I think, in Long Beach, where he basically goes in and he excavates, he removes the floor of the museum and then digs right down to the very bottom of the foundation. So you're seeing, I mean, obviously metaphorically, it's talking about what how are museums founded, what are they based on, but it's a kind of a beautiful piece that also creates this extraordinary kind of environment and sort of slightly demolishes the museum in the process. So that, anyway, I think that's a great piece to do. But if
definitely.
if you lose your floor, yeah.
So we're going to end on a lighter note, and I have a really great question. Where is it? The really great question. Angela Santefis is asking, what has been the most surprising response you've received about your work?
Oh, that's a good question. The best response, or one of the things I most liked, I mean, maybe was when I did the piece with the car in Rome, the one with the candles. With that piece, it's in this deconsecrated church, and we brought the car in and just put it up on blocks. And we just put candles in the doorway, just in boxes. We weren't even really lighting them. There were a few that we lit, I think, on the car. But what was really surprising was the way just people would just, I mean, this is very Italian, I suppose, would just walk in and literally just start placing candles on the car without any kind of instruction at all. They would just do it. And then they just kept doing it. And it was like, and these are really regular people. They wouldn't even like question it. Like there was no kind of like, it was just the funniest thing. And it was kind of really beautiful that it was almost like a priori knowledge. This is just what they did. This is just what you do in a church. You light a candle and you put it on something. And it kind of just, this thing just grew and grew. And I think that was kind of really wonderful response, I suppose. I mean, it's like with the tree. I was up at the tree this week when we were installing, and people come up and ask me, the people said they were going to have a party under the tree. When people engage with the work but in a really physical, real way, I think that's tremendously kind of reassuring, I think, as an artist, when you don't feel that you feel that you've kind of involved yourself in someone's life in a really kind of great, kind of positive way, I suppose. That's quite natural somehow. That's kind of really kind of reassuring and yeah, that's kind of inspiring. That makes you feel
absolutely
you've done something
and
right.
What more could you want out of?
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing too. That's what's kind of funny about this. I mean, it's like there's like fame and there's career and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think most people become artists because they want to just engage. I think it's like kind of engaging with the world and with society. And I think that's when you manage that, that's it. That's the reward. That's the best thing you could possibly get.
Well, awesome. Mark, thank you for engaging with us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. I
encourage everyone to go out and see the tree. I'm going to do that. It's a really great COVID-free activity.
Absolutely.
Thank you for bringing that up. And again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Mark, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And a big thank you to Art Bridges for supporting this.
Thanks very much for having me.